I actually think that Microsoft is lying to us. This is the story of Microsoft. From the browser to the tablet to the cell phone, Office 365 is a goddamn nightmare on the web.
This is about putting the finger on the scale in a very serious way and saying the ideology of the people in power is the ideology that should be presented through these tools. What the hell?
There is two kinds of freedoms, freedom from and freedom to. And we need to live in a society that is well curated, but not straitjacketed.
Enough of the hype, enough of the, oh yes, DeFi is just around the corner and like you've got apps and it's a developer ecosystem. The main utility of this stuff is just grifting other people. Where's the goddamn utility?
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And on this week's show, we talk about Microsoft jumping into the vibe coding game, Trump passing an executive order about neutral AI, Coinbase launches Coinbase Base to change the face of social networking and creator economy, and YouTube age estimation. Is it a good thing for our kids or is it overreach by European governments? All this and much more on this week's show. Stay tuned right after the break.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by .tech domains. One thing about starting your startup that should be easy but isn't is naming it. Why is it so hard? Because all the good .com domain names are taken. So you end up doing something silly like misspelling it or adding random prefixes or suffixes. No more. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so you should make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. Head to get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy to grab your .tech domain today. That's www.get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast.
All right, for our first topic, Microsoft gets into the vibe coding game. They have launched something called GitHub Spark. The slogan here is dream it, see it, ship it. And it is essentially a cloud-based IDE with a LLM chat interface attached on the left and real-time preview over on the right. It allows you to build and iterate your way, ship with a click, familiar tools baked into GitHub, and it also requires zero setup. If I'm understanding correctly, and I haven't had a chance to use it properly myself, or use it at all myself, but it seems to be addressing many of the problems I've had with some of the other tools where it's sort of like the database just works, the API keys just work, and you can actually add LLM features to your app, not just use an LLM to make the app. And so, it seems actually, at least the positioning of it is quite a bit better than some of the basic vibe coding tools. But I imagine there is plenty of jank down in the usage of it, like most Microsoft tools. Yaniv, have you had a chance to see the announcement, play with it, or what is your first impressions hearing about it today?
My very first impression was a bit of a yawn because there are already a lot of vibe coding tools. And GitHub is in an interesting position because I would say that GitHub Copilot was the first AI enablement phase of coding, right? This was the first AI tool that developers were regularly using as part of their coding workflow. But I feel that GitHub and, Microsoft behind them really kind of lost their leadership quite a long time ago. We had Cursor, we had Windsurf, we have Claude Code, all of these things. And GitHub Copilot has become this kind of sleepy also-ran that hasn't really kept up. People use GitHub Copilot, but there's no buzz or excitement about it anymore. All of that has gone to their competitors. So when I see that GitHub has now launched Spark, I'm like, well, that's just another example of, them being a little bit behind the times now, which is probably true. But a couple of things have very slightly made me more excited. And it touches on what you were saying. So first of all, if you go to the announcement, there's a little executive summary at the top and it says, what's it for? And it says, building and sharing personalized micro apps, which are called Sparks. And, I think that also relates to what you were saying, Chris, that it works out of the box. So this is actually somewhere positioning wise and therefore product experience wise, somewhere in between the sorts of things that you can do inside Claude, the artifacts where Claude will actually make a little micro app for you just right in the chat window on a canvas. And the full-fledged vibe coding tools like Lovable, Bolt.new, V0, all of those. It's saying our aspiration isn't to use this even as a prototyping tool. They've put a personal productivity bent on this, or just a personal usage tool, which is like, hey, what if anyone could make an app for themselves? What would that be like? And I think that's interesting. It's smart. It's a slightly different perspective on all of this. And it's like you said, Chris, it's not too ambitious. So all of this stuff where people, try to vibe code their way to an actual multi-million-dollar startup and then suddenly the database gets deleted, that's not going to happen because it is setting its sights lower. I think that's interesting. Works out of the box, works really well. There was a vibe coding tool called Base 44 that went from launch to acquisition, $100+ million acquisition in under 6 months. And their whole thing was full stack. It was opinionated. It had all of the different elements, database, deployment built in. You didn't get to choose which backend. And because of that, you didn't have API keys. They hosted it all and it was more reliable. So I think that is a smart point of view for what GitHub are trying to do. So not the biggest story of the year or even of the day, but yeah, I'm interested to see where this goes.
So here's the thing, Yaniv. I actually disagree with you. And I actually think that Microsoft is lying to us. If they were building a sort of everyday user tool where anyone can make little Sparky apps, they could or should or would build that into Office 365. You should be able to kind of spin up an app if you're an everyday worker and make a little quick applet or Spark, as they call it, for yourself. You wouldn't have GitHub integration. You wouldn't have that, IDE looking UX. I think what they're actually doing is they're lowballing the vision. They're describing sort of an MVP, and they're setting the expectations low. But their ambition for this thing, I would imagine, is to become a serious workhorse IDE over time. Either that, or the product managers shat the bed. Right, like I really think if it's like little, do you remember back in the day you had like Microsoft Access and you had like
Loved
VB.net.
Microsoft Access. My first paid tech work was building Microsoft Access DBs. Got me through university.
I was involved in a lot of that as well, and you could make these little like macro apps, and you could build apps into Office and into Excel. I think that taken to the next level is where this goes for what you described, which is anyone, anytime can build a little applet and go inside their productivity suite, whether it's Google's Workspace or Microsoft 365. I think they're pitching this at that level right now. Oh, don't worry about it. It's just these little applets. It's not I think that's just because they're trying to manage expectations and start with an MVP. But before you respond to that, one last point on the opinionated piece. I do think these things need to be more opinionated, especially since they're not as good as they think they are just yet. They need to have the best practices baked in for great auth, magic links, databases, all this sort of stuff. Because at least in my experience, and it may be user error, but every time you try to get them to build great auth experiences, great user management, great database, image upload, whatever, they just shit the bed. And so they really need to have some sort of templating thing. And I actually spoke to the Bolt CEO offline about this when we interviewed him, and he was saying, yeah, they were thinking about sort of templated prompts or pre-canned prompts that would help you fast forward to some of these things. But yeah, the LLMs need a little bit more opinions during their development process.
It's funny. I was on their sort of press release where I quoted that, but then if you go to their full page, it already is saying more, right? The main page is now saying dream it, see it, ship it. It helps you transform your ideas into full stack intelligent apps and publish with a single click. So yeah, even their positioning is contradictory right now. And looking at the actual screenshot, it looks a hell of a lot like Cursor. So I'd say maybe this is trying to be some hybrid, right? I've talked on the show before that we have what are called the vibe coding tools, which are top down. It's like put in a prompt and it'll build the app for you and you don't need to code. And then maybe if you can code, you can look at the code later and tweak it. Versus bottom up tools like Cursor, Windsurf, Claude Code, where really the expectation is you are an engineer, you know how to code, you give it incremental instructions in more technical language around what you want it to build and you build it. And I've said, I've been skeptical about the top down ones. And I think bottom up is where most of the traction is. I think GitHub, for those who used to like watching Silicon Valley, maybe they're trying something that's a bit middle out, right? Which is they're saying, hey, we're not top down, we're not bottom up, we're middle out. We are a vibe coding tool. We do the hosting, the deployment, the prod, and all of that. But also, we're an IDE, like the code takes center stage rather than being kind of buried underneath the app that you're building. I'll have to reflect some more and probably try it out to see whether this is a smart thing to do or not. But what GitHub has as an advantage is it has a near monopoly. It has ubiquity, let's say, as a source control tool. Everybody uses GitHub. Not everyone uses GitHub Copilot, but everyone uses GitHub. And that's a very powerful place to be. You don't have to import your repositories or anything like that. GitHub is there and you can start building with it. So I think it could be interesting. Yeah, let's watch this space. I think you're right, Chris, to say this is a bit of a bigger story than it seems.
Yeah, and also earlier you said they were ahead on Copilot, but now it's sort of lost its luster. Shocking that Microsoft would be ahead on something and then shit the bed and fail to improve it over time. It's this is the story of Microsoft, I think. From the browser to the tablet to the cell phone to this day, Office 365 is a goddamn nightmare on the web, just a nightmare. And their authentication flow, the whole thing. I've been forced to use it for the last 12, 24 months with some of the startups I work with. And it's just like, it literally probably, it reduces my productivity by about 10 or 20%. Because I refuse to install their vaunted desktop apps as well.
GitHub is a slightly different case, right? It is an acquisition that Microsoft made. It has kept its own brand identity, very clever. I feel like they were doing for the developer community what Google did with YouTube. And I thought it was one of the smartest acquisitions of all time, just in terms of, positioning and everything. And I'd say I'd give the post-acquisition execution about a 5 or a 6 out of 10. I would not say they've shut the bed. What they haven't done is they haven't enshittified GitHub. Everybody still uses GitHub. It is still a delight to use for its core functionality. GitHub is where it's at. But I think in terms of actually capitalizing on that, saying, hey, what we can do as Microsoft is infuse lots of capital into what you do so that you can really build a preeminent developer tool chain, build out from what we have. I feel like they have slow rolled it. They haven't really capitalized on that opportunity. And so GitHub now is not a particularly more, I was going to say it's not a particularly more powerful tool than when it was acquired. Maybe it's more powerful, but what they haven't really been able to do, with a partial exception of what I would say is GitHub Actions, which have actually gotten a decent amount of traction, is they've just not been able to sort of cross-sell, expand out from that core like version control and pull request sort of tool into being a ubiquitous developer tool. And I think that was a missed opportunity.
All right, well, those are our thoughts on Microsoft and their new GitHub Spark vibe coding IDE. What do you think? Is this going to be the future of development tools from Microsoft, or just another also-ran for vibe coding? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. The next thing we wanted to talk about was Donald J. Trump's executive order on, let me read the title exactly here, Preventing Woke AI in the Federal Government. I would imagine sponsored by, co-authored by, shaped by our good friend David Sachs. I say that with sarcasm. I want to read a couple of the clauses from this executive order because I thought it was really quite interesting. They're saying that they want AI in the government that follows the following principles. Truth-seeking. LLM shall be truthful in responding to user prompts seeking factual information or analysis. LLMs shall prioritize historical accuracy, scientific inquiry, and objectivity, and shall acknowledge uncertainty when reliable information is incomplete or contradictory. And ideological neutrality. LLMs shall be neutral, non-partisan tools that do not manipulate responses in favor of ideological dogma, such as DEI. Developers shall not intentionally encode partisan or ideological judgments into LLM outputs unless those judgments are prompted by or otherwise readily accessible to the end user. I actually found those two clauses, which are really the main two clauses that enshrine what they mean by objectivity and truth-seeking, or at least what they enshrine as preventing woke AI. I actually found those to be surprisingly simple, inoffensive, and clear-eyed about what you would want from an LLM. I think the problem comes as follows. Number one, liberals and conservatives don't see their own humps. They don't see their own bias. And so defining what bias is difficult. We talked about this in the last episode. And so I think some might say, well, OpenAI is entirely and pure and free of bias, and I think others would say that's not true. I think there are many on the right that would say X or XAI or Grok or whatever the hell is free of bias, and I think that's objectively not true. And so the people claiming or calling for bias are the loudest, are the ones injecting the most bullshit into the process. And these guys are entirely untrustworthy and craven, power-hungry liars. What I'm trying to say is the text of the executive order, I think, is actually very clear-eyed and fairly fair. I think the implementation by these people being the White House and the leadership in power, belies or betrays the principles enshrined in this particular executive order. What do you make of this, Yaniv?
Okay, so I think you're giving the text too much credit. All I can say is it could be worse, but that's actually pretty bad. And, its ideological stars shine through, and also its naivety at best shines through. But I think the problem is I'm not a deconstructionist on this stuff, right? Like, you're sort of, if you look at the text and pretend that it's being written in good faith, it's clearly not. Like, if you talk about truth seeking, I would have to say that this White House and President Donald J. Trump, and I'm not saying this partisan, I mean, I am partisan, but I think there is a huge body of verified facts that Donald J. Trump simply denies. He is the least truth-seeking president, I would say, in US history, and that's the sort of thing he would say, by the way, ever. The least truth-seeking president ever, right?
Bigly. He's a bigly liar.
That's right. He's the biggest liar in the history of humanity ever.
Yeah.
And, the idea that this is some sort of good faith attempt to combat biases of all sorts in LLMs is just absolutely laughable. Truth is not important to these people. And so when they say that they want truth seeking, but then in the same breath, they talk about DEI, what's the quote in this? It says, one of the most pervasive and destructive of these ideologies is so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, is DEI perfect? Has there been overreach? Yes. Is it one of the most destructive ideologies ever when we've got Grok calling itself Mecha Hitler and wanting to bring back the Nazis? No, not even close. This is clearly a crusade to call out DEI, to use the word woke, which has like clearly been coded to mean from the right wing, anything that the left wing says that we don't like. That shows that there is not an shred of credibility that this thing is about truth seeking, that it's about eliminating bias. This is about putting the finger on the scale in a very serious way and saying the ideology of the people in power is the ideology that should be presented through these tools. And that, my friend, is fascist thinking. And this thing I cannot read as anything other than an attempt to sway these people, these providers of the models from the White House, a very powerful place, to say the sorts of things that are aligned with the ideology of the current regime, that is totalitarian, that is fascist. And by the way, I'm not an expert on the US Constitution, but it sure sounds like it goes against the First Amendment. So what the hell?
I fundamentally agree with you about these people. I guess my point is that the specific words of the specific clauses that refer to the truth-seeking aspect of the LLMs that they're claiming that they want, I would find it to be relatively inoffensive and relatively something that I would want LLMs to aspire to, other than the specific reference to DEI, which I think is unnuanced and is a cudgel that they're using. I think that it's actually a fairly good aspiration. But as we're both alluding to, Yaniv, this is a sort of form of duck speak or doublethink from 1984, right? Where they use certain words like freedom, but they mean the opposite, which is basically tyranny through controlling, through, firing judges and stacking courts and prosecuting your political enemies and lying about the Epstein files. These people lie. They lie all the time. If they're speaking, they're lying. I'm saying the words here taken on face value, I think are relatively worth aspiring to. But I don't trust the people who wrote them, and I don't trust the people who are going to implement them. So, I think we're both in enthusiastic agreement about that. Again, I mentioned this maybe last episode or a couple episodes ago. If you want to know what's happening in the world and you feel torn or confused or bewildered, one of the ways you can very clearly demystify some of the things going on right now is to ignore the words and the rhetoric coming out of people's mouths and just observe their behavior and the outcomes of their behavior. The outcomes of their behavior is their intent. It is their intent. If people are being harmed and civil liberties are being taken away, that is their intent. The cruelty is the point. If people are being slaughtered or starved, that is their intent. Ignore the rhetoric, pay attention to the outcomes. People are not stupid, they're not ineffective, they're achieving exactly what they want. That's a very simple way, a very simple hack to understand what's going on in the world. All right, those are our thoughts about rhetoric versus action. What do you guys think? Is this a well-meaning and well-needed guardrail for AI moving into the future, or is it a bunch of doublethink and duck-speak from the Orwellian government in power in the US today? Jump in the comments and let us know your thoughts.
I think the people who think the former have already unsubscribed, but anyway, welcome in the comments.
Well, you never know. People will find us through the algorithm. We'll see what happens.
All the best .coms are taken or crazily overpriced, so you settle on a workaround domain for your website. Don't compromise. Get a clean, sharp .tech domain that instantly says, this is a tech startup. Grab yours at get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast or via domain registrars like GoDaddy.
All right, on to the next topic. The next thing we wanted to talk about is Coinbase Base. Yaniv, let me tell you a little bit about this announcement if you haven't seen it. Coinbase did a fairly significant announcement recently. It was very significant for them because, they did a whole, Apple-like keynote with a stage and an audience and a live stream and the whole bit. And they came out and they announced the next stage of evolution for what they call Base. Now, if you're not familiar, and I wasn't super familiar, Base is a kind of level 2 blockchain on top of Ethereum, which is intended to do fast and cheap execution of blocks of storage of data and transactions, built obviously or championed by Coinbase and invested in by Coinbase in terms of their contribution to the community. And it has, I think, primarily been at the kind of the blockchain layer. That's basically where they've spent most of their time. If I'm understanding the evolution correctly, they are now adding, or they've accelerated that blockchain. They made it even faster. And they've added on top a killer app with multiple features, wallets and social features and an app store inside and personal identity building. And actually, they've converted the Coinbase wallet app to the Base app. And then they've added on top of that, or underneath that actually, is a Base SDK, essentially a tool chain, a toolkit to build other Base applications. I will say, as someone who's really passionate about developer platforms, developer ecosystems, closely observing and having built these things at scale, it was a breathtaking rollout. They understood the assignment. It was brilliantly branded, beautifully designed. It was the utility layer, the application layer with the reference app, all the key things you need in the reference app, which is identity, distribution, and revenue. A great developer toolkit, although of course I haven't used it, and a brilliant vision with incredible reference apps or case studies, examples on stage to kickstart the excitement and to set the stage, set the trajectory for what they want people to build. This is the kind of developer platform you want to build and you want to launch. It's the one that I tried to build at Uber. Not exactly this, but a different utility that was sort of nipped in the bud at the last second. To me, it was very impressive. Whether it will work, whether it'll achieve critical mass, whether it's the tool we need for today, I'm not passing any judgment on that, but it's a masterclass in brand building and developer platforms and ecosystems. So go watch it if for nothing else you're interested in that. Yaniv, what do you think of this announcement, specifically what they announced and how they announced it and what it might mean for the DeFi, crypto, social ecosystem moving forward?
Well, you're going to have to explain it to me a bit more. So I haven't watched the announcement. I have had a look through the website. And so, at one level, the Base app looks to me like a rebrand of their existing app, which was the Coinbase wallet. You're talking about the masterful way in which they have created a developer platform. And I think that's what I'll need more explanation of. And, I am a skeptic because the concept of Web3 and dApps, distributed apps and all of that has been around for a long time. It has been smoke and mirrors and hype and very little utility to people. So if we're talking about a developer ecosystem and that there are great reference apps and so on, I'd like to know what these things do beyond just allow people to gamble on crypto in novel ways.
Yeah. Okay. So as I touched on earlier, at its base, it is a wallet. In the crypto world, wallet simply means an identity, right? It is your ability to create an account, and those accounts tend to be inexorably or intrinsically linked to being able to store tokens, and tokens tend to be stores of value. So they tend to be, a kind of financial wallet. Okay. It's basically your identity and your store of value or objects or entities in the ecosystem. So it's a wallet. And as you said, it is the rebranded Coinbase wallet app. It's a self-custodial wallet. So basically you own the keys and no one else can control it. It is also a social network. It has a news feed, it has chat, and it looks a lot like Twitter and Facebook combined. And as I said in previous episodes, I think there is an opportunity to innovate around social networks. And in the shitification of Facebook and Twitter, I think there is room for new social networks. But more importantly for them, a social network represents organic distribution of content and ideas. Great developer platforms need great distribution. And the Facebook newsfeed was one of the very best distribution mechanisms for apps back in the day. That's what made the open graph, the open Facebook platform, so powerful. It wasn't open, but it was powerful. And so they've actually built an alternative social network oriented around creators, oriented around microtransactions. And it's not just about the creator thing. It's not just about what you would imagine on the surface, which is like, why do we need another social network? As a structural component of a developer platform and an ecosystem, you need a social network. And Facebook and Twitter have been blocking a lot of kind of these distribution channels through their social feeds. And then finally on top, they have another form of distribution and utility and revenue, which is their little app store where you can find and discover apps, which are powered by Base and the rest of the crypto ecosystem. And you can have deep hooks into the Base app and into the entire protocol, I imagine, where you can, for example, one of the things they showed is if you like a post on their social network, it can execute a microtransaction for you where it'll send money from your wallet to the person whose post you're liking. I right this second don't remember all the other apps, but they're apps that certainly can leverage financial interactions. But I don't think they have to be financial apps. They can sit on top of this social fabric, this monetization fabric, and execute really all sorts of things. One last thing I will say is I'm actually quite surprised that they were able to launch this app store. Apple, perhaps this was just prior to the Epic Games lawsuits, would actually disallow apps in their app store from having their own apps. Basically, the way they would say it, Tim Cook would say, "Don't build platforms on my platform, bro." And so Netflix wasn't allowed to have games in the Netflix app on iOS. And we at Uber, when we were building our own little app store of trip experiences, were playing close to the sun. Apple was like, you need to be careful here, guys. And so I'm actually surprised they got away with this, and it might be a part of the new, post Epic Games, verdicts, and they're trying to be less dictatorial about that. So I don't know if that explains it enough for you, Yaniv, but
no, it doesn't.
That's what I saw.
I don't know, Chris. Maybe you just caught me in a grumpy old man, Jay. But to me, all of this just feels like
you grumpy old man. Come on, I don't know about this.
I think to me, this is just an extension of the great crypto Ponzi, right? Again, I'm looking what are these apps? I'm on the Coinbase website. Oh, I found the website, Beginner's Guide to dApps. And, it has some of the traditional BS from crypto people about what's so valuable about them. Oh, it's decentralization and privacy and censorship resistant. And then it comes to the bit of what are some example apps, example use cases? One, collect NFTs. Okay, that has come and gone, right? And NFTs were clearly just a grift. And crypto using DeFi. So these apps are ways of getting more crypto for your crypto so you can crypto in your crypto. Number 3, games. First example, Axie Infinity, which was basically a Ponzi scheme that became no fun once people actually started to realize that this was just a way of making money. And it died a rapid death once it reached a certain peak. So I'm like, you know what? enough of the hype, enough of the, oh yes, DeFi is just around the corner and like you've got apps and it's a developer ecosystem. Where's the goddamn utility? The main utility of this stuff is just grifting other people, with the exception of Bitcoin, which we've discussed separately, right? And this is not about Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't need all of this song and dance. All of these other things are ways of getting you to basically bet money that other people will pay more later on. And, I'm just not there for it, Chris. Like, I feel like all of this like utopian BS as a cover for this grift to just make more money off bigger suckers, I'm not there for it anymore. So like, yeah, my official review is whatever. Come back to me about this amazing developer ecosystem when there are apps that normal people actually want to use that have nothing to do with just making money off other suckers.
You sound like people during and after the .com era, Yaniv, where it's like, oh, the internet is just about porn and ordering pizza. I can just pick up the phone and order a pizza. What's the big deal? Man, look,
no, that's not fair at all.
We've gone through.
There is no utility in this stuff. It's pure financialization of betting on other people's willingness to bet,
I think that's been true, and having worked with...
And remains true.
It may still be mostly true. And having worked with a number of crypto projects, they couldn't find utility with two hands and a flashlight. I agree with you. But the infrastructure and the architecture of blockchain and crypto is not inherently a scam.
No,
and
I never said it was.
Right. And it is incredibly powerful foundational technology for an emerging truth, which is that everything can be fractionalized, everything can be micro-monetized, and the speed of money, the velocity of money, or rather money can be disintermediated or unbundled from government, and can be the velocity of money can be accelerated and made more cheap. And that is very, very important and very powerful. And also trustless networks with transactions baked in is very, very important. It is a fundamentally important innovation on top of the internet.
People keep saying that, but the evidence never comes in. It's been well over a decade since the blockchain was invented, and the evidence just people keep saying, oh, it's very important. It's this powerful technology. And with a few small exceptions, and one big exception, which is Bitcoin itself, all it has been used for is grift. And, it's only so long that you can say this stuff before you actually show some evidence that there's value there.
I think the evidence is starting to pile up, but you need to pay attention to it and let go of the skepticism. So if you look at the Robinhood, OpenAI, and SpaceX investment products, they are powered by essentially NFTs, right? They are essentially fractionalized ownership through the blockchain. You will be able to buy or fractionalize your assets. And when I say that, it's such a fancy way of saying sell shares in your home, in your car, in your energy production, in your companies via the blockchain in a way that is not mediated by legacy institutions, which are slow, fat, and expensive. This is going to happen. It's happening now.
Okay, I wasn't there for that episode that you recorded, but I was shouting at my podcast app because this fractionalization stuff from Robinhood is nothing to do with amazing new possibilities enabled by technology. It is all to do with doing an end run around regulations that are there for a very good reason, which is securities regulations.
Oh my God.
Right?
Hang on a second. Some regulation is good. Not
this
all
regulation is good. I'm not saying
Not
all regulations.
regulation.
I'm saying securities laws exist for a very valid reason. And this idea of fractionalizing everything so that you don't actually have to, for example, comply with reporting laws around publicly traded stocks is simply a regulatory arbitrage that is bad for the world and will be shut down soon enough anyway.
Look, I think that democratizing access to equity, to private equity, prior to it meeting some arbitrary hurdles to be listed on the stock exchange I think that's a good thing.
They are not arbitrary hurdles. You can't just say arbitrary and have it be true. They are there for a reason. They were put there because guess what? Because in the early 20th century and earlier than that, the stock market was a giant world of grifts and scams and people on the make, and the governments everywhere in the world said, this cannot go on because we have undermined all confidence in the markets. So we need to make sure that the companies listed here are actually doing what they say they do, that the balance sheets are actually what they say they are, because otherwise they're just ripping off everyday people. And that is what crypto is all about here, right? So like, I can't be excited about this. It's just people figuring out other ways to rip each other off. And like I said, I'm not there for it.
I think that's really reductive, Yaniv. I think the rules were put in place for what you're describing. However, they've had unintended consequences, which is to block many people from being able to access things that would help make them richer. It's just the same way that people accuse OpenAI of wanting regulatory enforcement because it's regulatory capture. So what's happened is that many of these rules do protect people, but they've also created a form of regulatory capture, which has made it harder for the poor to get access to tools that we take for granted, especially people outside of modern Western countries. And so there is enormous utility here in democratizing access to financial systems and products that were not accessible before.
So the utility describing here is doing an end run around the law, basically.
No, it is about
that's pretty much what you said.
It is about rethinking the laws from first principles. Is there ways of enforcing reputation, rules, and agreements in ways that are not mediated by paperwork, but by smart contracts, by reputation, by digital systems? I'm not defending what has happened before, and I'm not even defending what's happening now. What I'm saying is that there is a way to build systems that inculcate, that implement reputation and guardrails in a more liquid and democratized way, in a more dynamic way. And these things will mature over time, but you can't look at the Wild West stages and call it all nonsense and going nowhere. The last example I'll give you is people are saying that, Bitcoin is just used by thieves and criminals, right? Well, so is the US dollar. And, this is just a tool. And as the tool matures, so will the guardrails and so will its utility. But I think it's very important. In any case, it doesn't matter. We'll see how it plays out. But I thought the base app was an incredible rollout for a developer platform. Just if you look at it as a masterclass in rolling out a new platform. And I think that its ambition is really exciting. It seems to be the concrete implementation of stuff that a lot of other people have been waving their hands at. A lot of the grifters and the fakers, Yaniv, who have claimed they're building this. I think that the Coinbase team has done what the Coinbase team always does, which is to take these ideas that are all hype and hot air and implement them with Silicon Valley principles and product focus and seriousness of purpose. I actually think Coinbase team is a fucking amazing team and company. And so I wouldn't bet against Coinbase and I wouldn't bet against Base. I think they're very, very, they're awesome people.
Look, I will be happy to eat humble pie if this stuff is used for anything that provides genuine utility beyond speculation. I see no evidence of it so far.
What's interesting is that this might make you even more upset, Gary Vaynerchuk was on stage during the announcement, and he's an investor in Coinbase, and so well incentivized to sing their praises. But he was mentioning, and I believe him, how he was been talking about creators making hundreds of thousands of dollars on YouTube one day, and how people were laughing at him and saying he's an idiot. And obviously creators now make millions and millions on YouTube. This is really a creator platform. That's the way they positioned it, is a creator platform.
Creating what though?
Creating content, photos, videos, music, basically an alternative to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And he's mentioned the way he framed it rather is, just like people laughed at YouTube and laughed at me saying they're going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars on YouTube, this will be a massive way for art and creators to earn a living and to create art. And again, I think the NFT thing was a load of shit. It was obviously dumb, but it was an experiment. It was a formative stage of a real and powerful technology.
It was a grift, my friend. It's not an experiment. Just follow the money.
All right. Well, those are our thoughts.
Obviously, Chris and I strongly disagree. Which side do you come down on? Team Chrissy Crypto or Team Skeptical Yaniv? You know the one you want to be on. It's my team. Let us know down in the comments. All right, on to the next topic.
I love it. All right.
The final topic we wanted to talk about is age restrictions on YouTube. So there are two stories which might be related, not entirely coincidentally by timing. So the first story is that Australia has these new social media laws for blocking account creation for children under 16 across a variety of social media sites. YouTube was going to be exempted from that, and now it's not. So people under 16 will not be able to create accounts on YouTube in Australia. Now, within days of this announcement, and like I said, I do not know if it's coincidental or not, YouTube announced that they are rolling out new machine learning technology that identifies probable teenage users of YouTube based on their behavior. So even if you say, you sign up with and you say, I'm 27 years old and whatever, based on the sort of videos you watch, your general behavior, maybe who you follow and so on, you will be identified as a probable teen. And there will be some restrictions placed on your account. Now, these are not like YouTube Kids or whatever, but for example, you will not have access to personalized ads. You will get limited exposure to potentially harmful content. So the example given was videos that tend to be associated with body dysmorphia that lead to eating disorders. You won't be able to watch them repeatedly if this flag is on your account. And there will be various digital well-being tools enabled. And so YouTube is now saying, yes, okay, we know that some of our stuff here is harmful to younger people, and we are going to apply a stronger duty of care to people under 16. And this is not just rolling out in Australia, this is rolling out in the US, and I believe ultimately worldwide. And also, that there are similar things happening in the US around age verification for minors on social media. So I think this is YouTube trying to sort of head off the heavy-handed approach and say, hey, we are going to show that we can be responsible here, so you don't have to regulate us. What are your thoughts on this, Chris?
Yeah, so I think if you're an adult that has the mental age of a 16-year-old, you're in trouble because your browsing pattern and your watch pattern is going to get you shut down by YouTube. That's number one. That's my first thought. I'm in trouble is essentially what I'm saying.
Got to stop watching those Minecraft videos, guys.
I do watch all the Mr. Beast videos. I'm fascinated by his techniques to attract and keep audience attention. I think that's really fascinating. Look, I think better algorithmic curation of users and content is long overdue. I have seen the algorithm, especially the YouTube algorithm, very quickly take me down the manosphere, extreme right, anti-woke sphere by just watching a few of those videos out of curiosity or out of research. It's just like, oh, what is Candace Owens saying about this? And it's like, oh my God, I'm now watching, all this crazy shit. And I do think that those algorithms need to be more resistant to polarization and driving extreme worldviews. And to minimize harms for children. I think that's fair to say and incredibly important. At the same time, I struggle with Australia and their nanny state laws and their heavy-handed and unnuanced approach to the world. Sort of connected to our last topic, which is rules have unintended consequences, and they do serve to narrow freedoms. I think just a side conversation on this. I think one of the conversations that don't occur enough is the idea that there is two kinds of freedoms: freedom from and freedom to. The US optimizes for freedom to get raped by your credit card company, freedom to get shot, freedom to make up new financial products, freedom to drive over the speed limit.
Freedom to get raped by your president, for that matter.
That too. Whereas Australia and Europe optimize for freedom from credit card debt or undue credit burdens, freedom from getting hit by a car at too high a speed, freedom from being exposed to content that might be harmful to you as per the decision of the government. And I really think that there is just this balancing act that many of these countries are not quite getting right. And there are these unintended consequences in both directions. Emil Michael, friend of the pod, who used to be on almost every episode, who is now in the Trump administration, he once accused me of being red-pilled. And sometimes you will hear me speak with more caution about the woke mind virus. I don't think that's a black and white issue. I think that some aspects of it by some people have gone too far. I think some regulations and laws go too far. So I'm not a pure progressive on the far left, and I'm not a pure, definitely nowhere near the middle of the right now. And so I just want these conversations to stop devolving into like regulation bad or woke good. In this particular case, look, I do think that it's clear society is being polarized, and that YouTube and others are playing a pretty active role in it. The algorithm is playing a pretty active role in it, and we need to try to find ways to quickly minimize these harms. I think YouTube's approach here of being algorithmic and nuanced and trying to subtly curtail these harms from their algorithm is a good step, and I think it's needed.
Look, I agree with basically what you say and the positioning. And so to me, what's, I guess, disappointing about this is that they waited so long to do some of this stuff. And, where I have sympathy for the folks who are in favor of regulation is they say, look, these companies have had the opportunity to show that they take the stuff more seriously for a long time, and they haven't shown it. And therefore, we're going to regulate. And what I wish is a world in which YouTube has for years been taking the safety of minors really seriously, so that the question of regulation doesn't even really come into it. And like I said, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but I feel that the general pressure from countries like Australia, but also states in the US, so it's not just, Australia versus the United States, to actually require age verification for accounts, to ban accounts for people under certain ages, is finally forcing companies like YouTube, like Facebook, to take some of this stuff more seriously, which is undoubtedly a good thing in my view. Now, I would like to hope that if they take it seriously enough, the need for regulation will disappear and the support for regulation will disappear. But there are too many parents who rightly see their children falling down these rabbit holes who are actually big supporters of that regulation. And, for me, that means I'm a reluctant supporter of the regulation too, because without better self-policing of the sort that's just being rolled out, it is the lesser of two evils. But what I would prefer is a much more nuanced, to your point, take, self-regulation by these platforms, taking the responsibilities seriously and not just hiding behind Section 230 and safe harbor and free speech to say, no, we are big, we are important. YouTube is now the most watched platform on television, let alone on devices, right? We have huge cultural power, and we're going to take that seriously as custodians of the societies in which we operate. And so this is a really positive step forward to me. I'd like to see more of it.
Yeah, and as a kind of an aside to this topic, it's something that, inspired a thought in me. As the father of a 3.5-year-old, you often hear this tension, this argument, these differences in philosophies around kids and screen time. We're not talking about 16-year-olds now. We're talking about, 3.5, 4, 5-year-olds. And there's this sort of debate between, I don't give my kid any screens, and my kid watches, his iPad all the time for self-soothing or something. I think there's also a more nuanced conversation that needs to happen about that. Our kid watches a lot of YouTube for kids, and it is heavily, heavily curated by us, especially by my wife. We pick science shows that explain how the world works, like Blippi, shows like by Miss Rachel. We also put like some of the MKBHD videos, the specifically selected ones that explain how like the robot dogs work from Boston Dynamics, and how the rover works on Mars, and how the planets work. I would credit a large portion of my kids' intelligence, curiosity, and just world knowledge to YouTube and to his iPad. And I find it enormously constructive to his education and to his sophistication. So I think there needs to be more of a nuanced conversation around kids and devices, and it's about content, not screens. And as you said, Yaniv, it's hard for parents to police what their kids are doing when they get older. And I'm not talking about that. But I am saying that this kind of black and white screens, not screens thing misses the point, which is really it's about content.
I completely agree. I think there's amazing content on YouTube. There's even amazing content on TikTok. The point is that a lot of these platforms have basically weaponized dopamine, right, to create these cycles of content addiction, right, and also taking people down dark paths. And I agree as a parent too, that curating the content and also gating access and saying, you know what, you get 1 hour a day or whatever, you do it at these times. I decide when the screen goes away. That's really valuable. And, I've seen this argument, which again is a bit of a more libertarian argument that says like, this is about parental responsibility. Stop being a nanny state, to use a term that you used. Let parents decide. Now, my concern with that is that not every child is blessed with parents who are going to do the right things. And abdicating societal responsibility and saying, let parents decide, this technology is too dangerous. It can do too much harm for that to be the case. In the same way that we don't let parents decide whether a 3-year-old can smoke or drink alcohol. We cannot just say these platforms are free to weaponize our evolutionary brain biology to strengthen their monetization engines. Parental responsibility is part of the solution, but it can't be all of it.
Yeah, you'll notice I never, during our conversation, said, well, the parents should be policing their kids because it's not fair.
I just wanted to make that clear.
No, I understand. No, neither of us is saying that. I think it's unfair to ask parents to try to counteract, military-grade technology weaponized straight into their kids' eyeballs. And so the big tech companies must take some responsibility. The government must take some responsibility. And we need to live in a society that is well curated, but not straitjacketed. And then on top of that, parents need to exercise judgment, and there must be freedoms for people to express and innovate themselves. And so, the answer, as always, is a healthy balance between all the things. And what's lost, I think, in the Australian debate is the balance towards freedom to, and what's lost in the American debate is the balance towards freedom from. I don't think the balance is quite right in all cases, in all places. And I think it's worth having that conversation explicitly about the tension between those two freedoms.
I think it is. But just to, in this, I agree with you. In this particular topic, just to defend our homeland here, is that if you think about what does it mean to ban YouTube for people under 16, it doesn't mean that it becomes illegal for a 15-year-old to watch YouTube. What it means is the parents are in charge. So this is actually a way of handing control back to parents, because of course I have a YouTube account. If I want to let my kid watch it and I get to program what they watch, that is completely feasible. What it doesn't allow is for a child to have their own YouTube account that starts to learn their preferences, that sends them down rabbit holes that parents don't have visibility into. And I think that's, it's hard to argue against that, really.
Well, this is actually worth debating. So I have not looked at this closely enough to understand what the implementation details would be. But I actually think blocking kids from having a YouTube account is fucking dumb. They need a YouTube account, otherwise you can't detect that they are kids. You can't learn their algorithms. The parents can't curate their content, and there is no lifelong relationship with sort of self-control, discipline, curation, and literacy for how these tools work. So my kid has a YouTube account. He has a kid's YouTube account. It is slaved to or dependent on my wife's account, but it's an account. And so this is where I'm saying the nuances matter here. It's not about screen, no screen, account, no account. It's about the nuance of the content, the algorithm, and the curation tools all working together to help give kids digital literacy in a screen-based digital economy, networked, connected economy. And so, if the law of this is the proposed law, the actual law is you're not allowed to have an account for a kid, give me a break. There needs to be some record in the database somewhere that the kid can hold on to so that the kids can apply these controls. All right. Well, those are our thoughts about kids, about content, and about the responsibility of the big tech companies to contribute to the well-being of society. What do you guys think? Do you agree with us, or do you think it should be more of a libertarian thing where everyone can do whatever they want? Join us down in the comments and let us know your thoughts.
Okay, well, that's the pod, guys. Chris, if people want to follow you online or even work with you and get some of that wisdom into their brains, into their company, how do they do that?
Yeah, you can learn all about me over at chrissaad.com or follow me on all the social media at Chris Saad. How about you, Yaniv?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a bit of a less boring place. I love getting requests from TSP listeners. So if you are listening to this, please connect with me. Let me know you come from the Startup Podcast. I will happily accept your request. Also, I'm currently doing a pre-seed raise for my new startup, Violet. So if you're an angel investor and keen to learn more, feel free to DM me.
All right, mate. Great show as always.
Absolutely. Have a good one, Chris. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by .tech domains. Naming your startup should be easy, but it isn't, because all the good .com names are taken or wildly overpriced. No more. You don't have to compromise. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. How do you do that? Head to www.get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy and grab your .tech domain today. Get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast so they know you came from us.